Hello, I'm Dr. Ron Eglin, coming to you from Daytona State College, and this is part 2 of the FormaDillo form management software application overview. And this is a relatively advanced C# ASP.NET programming lecture, and it's going to cover some fairly complex topics. If you have viewed part 1, you would have seen an overview of what we meant by dynamic form management, but let's go further here. So first, a review of the architecture, this concept of form pages, and form elements, which is critical to the overall architecture. Now realize that these objects, form pages, and form elements, really just deal with displaying the forms. It doesn't deal with the data that's in the forms, and there is an actual parallel architecture with form data, form page data, and form element data. Now, depending upon the application, you can actually achieve what you need by having either just form data or form page data. And different applications of this software, since I've written it to do multiple different things, fit better with either one of those two architectures. But the concept there is that you actually have a parallel object called form data, which stores the data from a form, and you have multiple instances of form data for every form, for every set of data that you have. So we're going to talk today really about how does this whole thing display, and I'm really going to go from the code level here. So to display a form, I have here a simple, straightforward user control in the ASP.NET code, the HTML-based code that does this. And the key to this is that you actually have a placeholder here. If you recall from the first lecture that the form or the form page is capable of answering a table which has a control collection which has all the controls in it. And each control actually has a name that is unique but can be associated with data that is put into that form. And then there's 3 buttons, save, update, and cancel. Now, when I instantiate this user control onto a page and I actually load the page, what I do is I check to see, hey, do you already have data? If you do, then the update button should show. Or do you not have data? And the save button should show. And we can show kind of how that works here in a minute. But this should be relatively straightforward. You should have no trouble looking at this code and understanding what this does. But let's look behind the scenes a little bit at this UC display form page. So it says when you create this user control, you're going to get a public partial class called UC display form page, and I do place inside of the declaration 3 event handlers: save clicked, update clicked, and cancel clicked. Now it doesn't mean that I don't actually handle these with methods in the user control. I do, but I need to have the capability of bubbling control up to the object which has the user control on it. So in other words, you would place this user control on a page. When the user clicks the save button, you would implement a save clicked, and that save clicked would in turn do something and then pass control up to, which is called bubbling an event, up to the page which had that user control on it. This is a crucial technique in L advanced programming, this ability to bubble events from one object to the parent object of that object. So let's just look at what actually goes on in the code behind. So when you create this user control on a page, and I haven't covered this code, it's going to be covered in another lecture, you actually put these objects on the screen, and then you, if you have data, you fill the data. So when the button save is actually clicked, okay, you want to basically save the values, and I have, and save values is very straightforward. It saves the values. It actually saves it all to the database, and save values returns the data ID of that data. Okay, in update, you don't need to actually set the form page data ID. You can do save values, and it will simply save the values. And then I switch the save button visible to false, the update button to true, vice versa here on the update. Okay, update should be true already. And then this save click does not equal to null, the save click, this is where you actually bubble the event to the parent. Remember, this is a user control, so the parent will be the page where the user control is actually on that page. And let's go back one step to that page. And the cancel click is pretty straightforward too. So now, if you go to that page, okay, and you should, if you're planning on doing this, you really should look at my lectures on event handling and event bubbling. But what we have to do in the page that uses this user control, you have to implement these event handlers so that when the user control bubbles the event, you have something to handle that event. So in other words, in the case where the user control saved is clicked, you have an event handler that's prepared to handle that. And this is the name here. It's the name of the method that's going to handle that. And you have it for all three situations, the save, the update, and the cancel. So what actually happens in this, let's just look at one of these. Let's look at the update clicked. First, that data got saved. I'm then going to implement a master form data class. I'm going to instantiate one using the master form data ID. The master form data ID, and we're going to show how these actual data, how these variables play into this here. Now in this case, I am keeping the data at the form page level. I have examples where I keep the data at the form level, and I have examples where I keep the data at the form page level. But in reality is if you have a form and every field in that form is unique, you can keep the data implemented in a class that has a pointer to the form. If you are going to have fields that will violate that uniqueness but will not violate it on the form page level, you can then you would actually have the ability to store the data in an object that is a form page data. But the master form, the big form that encompasses these form pages, also has to keep pointers to the form pages. So how this would work is when I want to update this, I create a new master form data. I tell it that the page actually needs to be remembered by the master form. I pull the values and then I update them. So as I get the values from the form and then I update them. Then I basically set the IDs to 0 because I've entered everything, so I can change it back to 0. And then I redisplay this form. That's it. May sound complex, but if you think of the logic of this, it's really straightforward what you have to do. If I were keeping the data at the form level, not the form page level, I would not need this line. Okay, I would simply have to ensure that that data in the get values was put into the object that stores the master form data, which in this case is MFD, master form data. Now, something that I do, and these are inside the user control, and I actually do this inside of my forms too. I use properties to keep track of the common session variables that I'm actually using. So for example, if you are working with the application and you bring up a form, there's going to be a current form ID. Okay, that is that form ID. And this itself is a property declaration. Okay, public int form ID with a get and a set. But what it does is it puts that value, it either pulls from the session, or in the set, it sets that value in that set. And it uses something called a session identifier, which is a global constant string variable that says this is the name of the session identifier for this object. So in other words, I don't have these strings floating around that I have to remember. Every object that I create that needs to be passed by ID inside of a session has an implementation of a session identifier. So in this case, form page has that. Okay, and I have multiple of those. So for master form data ID, and they all work essentially the same way. Now, if you notice something here, I've got this return session. Well, session is a global session variable. Session doesn't come with get identifier value and set identifier value. I've extended these. So we're going to talk about how I did that. And then another global property, which is of course implemented as a property in both the user controls and the pages, is the current user, which this is fairly straightforward if you look at how I did this as a get. I don't need a set because I don't set the current user on every page. I only set it when you log in. And it's either going to return the context user identity name, which means it uses the ASP.NET context, the membership model, or it returns a default user value. That's important because the user name is actually stored when you store data or you store something within this application. It remembers that you stored it. But if you go back to this one that we just talked about, these properties where it uses the session variable and it extends it, let's talk a little bit about that. How do you extend the session variables? Well, I have this thing called session extensions. And this is important in advanced programming to know that, yes, you can actually extend an existing object with it, like string within .NET, with extensions. And the way you do this is you actually create methods, which are methods part of a class with an extension. In this case, you pass it this session state as session and the identifier, and it simply does the line of code that you would normally do with the session to set that identifier. But what this does is it gives you a new method of the session object, which is an object that's defined by .NET. So now my session object actually has get identifier value, and it also has one for set identifier value. Same. So essentially, I've created new methods that give me more capability here. So let's go back and let's look at a big overview of what we've talked about. So how do I organize all this? And the organization of how you put together large-scale applications is important. First, I created a user control to display form pages. So in other words, I have a user control that has this capability. Within that, I have a placeholder, and the placeholder is simply a place where I'm going to dynamically place the controls that I want there, which are the text boxes and drop-down lists that I have. And the control will also have a button for save, update, and cancel, which does do some actions, but at the same time also implements event handlers to bubble the event up to the next object level, the object which is a container for the user control. And then I talked a little bit about how I actually handle both session variables, how I take session variables. Now, session variables are what allows me to pass these integer values for the IDs from page to page. And how that I handle them is I actually have each object has a named identifier, which is a string that it has as part of that's part of the object itself. And I've extended the session variable to be able to get and set these values relatively easy with different objects. So a lot of very complex concepts of writing very solid code are covered in this lecture. And what I'm going to cover in the next lectures is I'm going to go into the actual details of how I pull and add data to this and different architectures for doing this. But a good understanding of these different programming techniques is extremely important for top-level programming. So hopefully this was useful and it gets you one step closer to understanding how the entire FormaDillo application works. Good programming, and we're moving on to even more advanced topics next. Thank you very much, and good programming.